Hi listeners, welcome back. Today we have a new story by AB, The Reflection of Neptune. Looking at this diamond, I'm thinking most of diamonds bring admiration, others bring crime. So we have a new story about our detective Giovanni Guida, The Reflection of Neptune, Part 1. The bar was called the Last Harbor. The name suited it so perfectly that it seemed as if it had appeared even before the building itself. People came here when they had nowhere else to go, people who had lost their jobs, their patience, their reputation, or simply their interest in tomorrow. The bar stood on the outskirts of Ashford, in a district the city preferred not to mention in tourist brochures. During the day it looked grey and tired; at night it looked honest. The smell of cheap alcohol mixed with sweat, tobacco, and the damp dust of the streets. Behind the counter there were always bottles without labels, and the faces of visitors spoke more clearly than any sign. Dock workers drank here, along with the small-time gamblers, dismissed clerks, and the people whose past asked no questions because the answers were obvious. In this bar no one asked where you came from or who you had been before. The only important things were how long you could endure and when you would leave. At such hours Ashford seemed like a city without a center. It did not sleep, but it was not awake either. It simply existed, like an old machine running idle. Somewhere far away the lights of the city center were blinking, but only their weak reflection reached this place. The police came here rarely and never stayed long, like a man who knows it's dangerous to remain. The streets around the last harbor were narrow, with appealing facades, and the windows where no one looked outside. This district did not like witnesses. The bar was its heart, warm, loud, beating by its own rules. Someone was always listening, someone was speaking, and someone pretended not to care, even though he remembered every detail. In the far corner where the light from the lamps lost its strength and the faces became blurred, two men were sitting. One of them looked as if he did not belong to this place. He was neat, calm, with a posture that seemed foreign here. His fake mustache and beard were made roughly, almost deliberately, as if he was not afraid someone might notice them. He was not hiding. He was disguising himself in a plain sight which was far more clever. His gestures were restrained and his voice was quiet but confident. He did not speak about himself and not about profit. Instead, he spoke about another man's house, another family, and an object. He did not call it by its official name. He spoke about it as if it had lived in his thought for a long time. He described it not as a jewel, but as an injustice, something that had belonged to the wrong people for far too long. His companion listened carefully, with that mixture of skepticism and greedy interest that appears in a man who is used to risk but not to great opportunities. The man who would later be called the robber did not ask unnecessary questions. He saw before him neither a dreamer nor a madman. He saw a man who knew more than he said. That was enough. The information was clearly not accidental, and the proposal had been thought through. The share offered to him was small, almost symbolic, but honest. The man with the fake mustache did not insist and did not bargain as if money was secondary for him. He spoke as if he only wanted everything to happen, and the rest did not matter. When they parted, no one in the bar paid attention to them. Lost Harbor swallowed them just as indifferently as it swallowed hundreds of other stories. The clear sky and the pleasant rays of the sun softly fell upon the backyard of Detective Giovanni Guida's house. He sat at the table in the open air, slowly drinking a cup of coffee and occasionally looking at his butler Jack. Giovanni was thinking aloud that it felt unusual for him to begin the morning without whiskey. This new feeling even worried him a little. The taste of coffee, which he believed he had forgotten long ago, suddenly seemed pleasant and mild. However, something was clearly missing. There was a feeling of emptiness, as if breakfast was incomplete without some kind of snack, even something simple like a cookie. Jack calmly said, "Sir, there are cookies. They were baked specially for you." This naturally made the detective curious. He immediately understood that something more must be behind it. It turned out that the cookies had been sent by his sister. Hearing this, Giovanni smiled slightly and said, "In that case, there are only two possible outcomes. Either they will be truly delicious, or we will have to call an ambulance." After that, Butler went to bring the cookies. While Giovanni continued drinking his coffee, Jack Mercer entered the house. He was allowed inside without unnecessary formalities. He greeted Giovanni. "Good morning, Giovanni." "Good morning, Jack," the detective replied calmly. Their meeting was warm and familiar. They exchanged several phrases, and conversation soon moved to different subjects, including the matters that awaited them that day. During the conversation, Jack Mercer said, "There was a robbery this morning." The police had already visited the place because the family involved was very well known. Apparently, they had lost something extremely valuable, something so important that the loss concerned not only the family, but the entire city of Ashford. Giovanni raised an eyebrow slightly and replied with irony, "So, what was it? A kilogram of diamond or a suitcase full of gold?" However, it turned out that the stolen object was a historical discovery that belonged to this family for a very long time. Or rather, it had belonged to them before the theft. Jack Mercer shrugged slightly and said, "We can take our time. Perhaps we should have some tea first." Explained that he did not see much sense in following the trail immediately, especially considering that the police were already working at the scene and that Captain Overcross had been sent there. In such a situation, Mercer added, hurry may be unnecessary. At that moment the butler returned with the cookies. Giovanni immediately said politely, "Jack, please prepare some coffee for Mr. Mercer as well." Of course, sir, the butler replied. He nodded and left again. Left alone, the two men silently looked at the plate of cookies. Giovanni examined them with a noticeable suspicion, and Mercer noticed this and asked it with a slight smile. "You seem cautious," Giovanni answered calmly. "Experience teaches certain habits. Appetite often pushes a man to take a risk for the sake of taste. For the safety of my guest, I believe I should try it first." Jack Mercer did not immediately understand what he meant, but Giovanni had already taken a bite. After tasting it, he nodded with a clear satisfaction. "It is safe," he said, "and surprisingly good." He pushed the plate slightly toward Mercer. "Please." For Mercer such caution seemed strange, but for Giovanni it was completely normal. Since childhood he had often been something like a test subject for his sister, who loved cooking and experimenting. Sometimes her dishes were unsuccessful, sometimes they were caused discomfort, but sometimes they were the most delicious things he had ever tasted. That was why Giovanni both loved her cooking and treated it with caution. They sat, drank tea, spent time in calm conversation. Only after about an hour did they stand up and begin to prepare to leave. As usual, their path led toward the bus stop, the place where one could easily catch a taxi or take a bus. Part 2. They took a taxi and headed toward the place of the crime. During the ride, Giovanni once again began to think about the object because of which they had been called. After a short silence, he asked, "So what exactly was stolen?" Jack Mercer leaned slightly back in his seat and answered, "I once read about this jewel. It has some connection with the Egyptian rulers. After it was discovered, people gave it a special name because of its unusual reflection." Giovanni looked at him with curiosity. "And what is this name?" Mercer replied, "They call it the reflection of Neptune." Giovanni repeated the word slowly. "The reflection of Neptune? That is quite a name." Jack nodded. "Yes, and from what I understand, the stone must be extremely expensive. I'm not an expert in such things, but I'm certain that you'll understand much more when you see at least a photograph of it." Giovanni smiled faintly. "In my life I have seen many diamonds and jewels," he said, "but a discovery like that is certainly worth leaving home early in the morning." Mercer laughed quietly. "I'm still getting used to your definition of early morning, Giovanni. As far as I remember, it usually begins around 11." Giovanni raised an eyebrow. "I'm getting used to it myself," he replied. "In the past, my morning usually began closer to 1 in the afternoon." While the taxi moved through the streets of the city, Mercer began to speak about the Radcliffe family. "They have owned the reflection of Neptune for many years," he said. "For almost 40 years the jewel has remained in their family. It passed from generation to generation." He paused for a moment and continued. "The stone was originally purchased by their ancestors at an auction. By itself it is worth an enormous fortune. At the same time, hiding such an object is extremely difficult." Giovanni nodded slowly. "Yes," he said quietly, "when something is that valuable, ownership itself becomes dangerous. Soon they arrived at Radcliffe residence. It was a large mansion, and several police cars were already standing nearby. Giovanni immediately understood one thing. Captain Cross had either already been there or was still inside. In any case, the most important fact was obvious. The police already knew everything about the robbery. As they approached the house, Giovanni suddenly stopped. He looked at Mercer and said thoughtfully, "Tell me something, Jack. Are we certain that we are officially invited?" Mercer looked slightly surprised. "You mean you are walking toward this house as if you belong here?" Giovanni nodded. "Exactly." Mercer smiled. "You received a call this morning. Sir William Radcliffe himself asked for you." Giovanni relaxed a little. "In that case," he said calmly, "I hope Captain Oliver will not mind our presence." They were soon guided inside the mansion. Before long they found themselves standing in front of Sir William Radcliffe. At that moment Sir William was speaking with several police officers. When he noticed the two gentlemen, he stood up. Giovanni greeted him politely. "Good afternoon, Sir William." Jack Mercer also introduced himself. Sir William looked carefully at the detective. "I have heard about you before," he said slowly, "although I must confess that I imagined you somewhat differently." Giovanni titled his head slightly. "Oh, and how exactly?" Sir William replied. "I expected to see a typical Italian gentleman, someone like the man you can meet in the distant districts of the Green Streets." Giovanni smiled with irony. "That is a different story entirely," he said. "In reality I am that rare Englishman who cannot live a single day without a martini." Sir William gave a small laugh. Giovanni then raised his hand slightly. "But perhaps we should leave that subject and speak about the matter itself." Since the robbery had already happened before the call, Giovanni asked directly, "Tell me, Sir William, whom do you personally consider a possible suspect?" Sir William sighed. "Our family is still in shock," he admitted, "but both we and the police believe that this was a robbery." He gestured slightly toward the upper floor. "The thief entered through the windows. There were clear signs of a forced entry. The windows were locked, but someone managed to open them." Giovanni asked another question. "And who lives in this house?" Sir William answered, "Our family is quite large. There are 6 of us living here, myself, my wife, my 2 brothers, and our cousin, the son of our father's elder brother." He looked around the spacious hall. "The mansion itself is large enough to hold several families, not just 6 people." Giovanni nodded thoughtfully. "And what about security?" Sir William hesitated slightly. "Yes, we had security guards, 2 of them." He frowned. "However, by some unbelievable coincidence, both of them fell asleep." Giovanni's eyes narrowed slightly. "Both?" Sir William nodded. "Yes, Captain Cross found that extremely strange. He ordered them to be questioned immediately. They were taken away not long ago. Giovanni suddenly said calmly, "Sir William, may I ask for some coffee?" Sir William immediately replied, "Of course, I will have someone prepare it at once." However, Giovanni shook his head slightly. "That will not be necessary. We would like to look around the house anyway. I believe we can find the kitchen ourselves." Sir William nodded politely. "Certainly. Please feel free to examine anything you wish. I will gladly help in any way I can." When Giovanni looked carefully at Sir William's face, he noticed something unusual. The man seemed surprisingly calm. For a person who had just lost priceless family jewels, Sir William showed almost no visible anxiety. This seemed suspicious to the detective. Giovanni allowed himself a faint smile and followed the butler. Meanwhile, Mercer was carefully observing everything around him. As they walked through the mansion, he studied the interior, the details, the arrangement of the rooms. When they finally reached the kitchen, coffee was already being prepared for them. Mercer noticed that the kitchen was spacious and beautifully arranged. While looking around the room, his eyes suddenly stopped on something. For a moment he became silent and thoughtful. When the coffee was ready, several police officers approached them. They spoke for a few minutes, discussing the crime scene and the circumstances of the robbery. Finally, Giovanni said directly, "I would like to see the place where the jewel was kept." The officers agreed. They walked to the second floor. This was the place where the precious stone had previously been kept. One of the officers pointed toward the window. "This is where we believe the robber entered," he explained. According to their version, the criminal had broken the lock and then entered the room. While Jack Mercer examined the room and the place where the jewel had been displayed, Giovanni slowly approached the window. He carefully studied the frame and the wooden surface around it. After a moment he noticed scratches that surprised him. From the marks it seemed that the criminal had used considerable force. Giovanni thought for a moment and then asked, "Where exactly were the guards supposed to be?" One officer answered, "Normally one guard stays on the first floor and the other one on the second floor, but for some reasons both of them fell asleep." Giovanni nodded slowly. "I would like to see the place where they were sitting," he said. "I want to understand whether they could have heard anything from that distance." Part 3. They walked through the several rooms, carefully examining the surroundings. Giovanni moved slowly, paying attention to details that most people would not even notice. Jack Mercer followed him, occasionally looking at the furniture, the doors, and the arrangement of the rooms. When they reached the place where the guards had been stationed, Mercer noticed something almost immediately. On a small table there were clear signs that someone had eaten recently. A cup stood there, and beside it lay the remains of a sandwich. The sight caught his attention at once. He stepped closer to the table and looked at the cup more carefully. For a moment he wondered why exactly someone had been drinking from it. Giovanni soon joined him and also examined the cup. "I would like to take this with me," Giovanni said calmly. The butler, who had accompanied them through the house, did not object. He simply nodded. Giovanni lifted the cup carefully and then turned to Mercer. Take a closer look, he suggested. Mercer leaned forward and studied the inside of the cup. He noticed traces of sugar, but something else caught his attention as well. There was something unusual in the drink, something barely visible, something foreign. "It might be worth checking," Mercer said thoughtfully. "You always seem interested in these little chemical experiments." Giovanni gave a sly smile. "In some situations they are extremely useful." In the end they took the both cups that had belonged to guards and carefully placed them in a bag. They continued discussing what they had seen and exchanged several quiet assumptions. At that moment caller arrived from the police station. The news was unexpected. The robber had been caught. Everyone in the house seemed surprised by this development. Some members of the Radcliffe family even felt relief. They sincerely believed that now the jewel might soon be returned. Giovanni simply nodded. "Please send my congratulations to Captain Oliver Cross," he said calmly. However, just as Giovanni and Mercer were preparing to leave the house, a young police officer approached them. "Captain Cross asks you come to the police station," the officer said. Giovanni looked at him with interest. "For what reason?" "There is small inconsistency concerning the arrested robber." Giovanni did not hesitate. "Very well," he said, "we will go together." At the police station, the arrested man was already sitting in the interrogation room. Captain Oliver Cross was waiting for them. It was not difficult to catch him. The captain explained. Several witnesses saw a suspicious man near the Radcliffe house. Their descriptions matched perfectly. He paused briefly before continuing, and eventually the man himself admitted that he had been inside the house. Giovanni listened quietly. "But," Cross added, "according to him the jewel was not with him." A faint smile appeared on Giovanni's face. "I have questioned many people during my career," he said calmly. "I have seen many different ways in which people try to deceive others. In such situations, one always wishes to believe the suspect, but human lies can be extremely complicated." He looked toward the interrogation room. "I think I would like to speak with him personally." Captain Cross agreed. Inside the interrogation room, the robber looked nervous and frightened. When the Giovanni entered, the man immediately began speaking. "I was set up," he said quickly. Giovanni sat down calmly opposite him. "Explain." The robber swallowed and began to speak more slowly. "For about a month a strange man had been telling me about the house, about the jewel." Giovanni asked quietly. "Was he your partner?" "No," the robber replied immediately. "I only saw him a few times." "What did he look like?" The robber hesitated. "He was strange. He had a mustache and a beard, but they looked unnatural, almost like they were fake, like a part of the costume." Giovanni's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what exactly did he tell you?" "He said it would be easy to enter the house, especially through the second floor." The robber lowered his head. "But when I got inside, everything was different. It was not like he described." "What happened then?" Giovanni asked. "I realized something was wrong," the robber admitted, "so I tried to escape." Giovanni leaned back slightly in his chair. "Nevertheless," he said calmly, "you did illegally Enter the private house. The robber nodded slowly. Yes, he admitted quietly. That's true. I'm guilty of that, but I did not steal the jewel. He raised his head again. The man kept repeating the name of the stone. Giovanni looked at him closely. What name? The reflection of Neptune. The robber continued speaking. He explained that the strange man had described the jewel in detail and said many times that he wanted exactly that stone. Giovanni asked one more question. If you saw this man again, would you recognize him? The robber shook his head. I doubt it. Every time he looked a little different. Giovanni stood up slowly. One more question, he said. How exactly did we enter the house? Through the second floor, the robber repeated. That is what he told me to do. Giovanni nodded. Thank you. Without another word, he left the room. Outside, Giovanni asked the officers what had been found on the robber when he was arrested. They showed him the man's personal belongings. Among them was a lockpick. Giovanni examined it carefully. The tool had no sharp edges and was clearly designed only for opening window or door locks. Such a tool would have a great difficulty scratching or damaging wood. Giovanni looked at it for several seconds. Then he said quietly, I believe I need to speak with someone else. Part 4. Giovanni and Jack Mercer left the police station together. Standing on the steps of the building, Giovanni briefly returned in his thoughts to the evidence they had found. Without delaying any further, he decided how to continue. He handed the cups that had been taken from the guard's table to Mercer. Please examine these, Giovanni said calmly. I would like to know exactly what was inside them. Mercer nodded. I will let you know as soon as I have the results. Giovanni meanwhile had already made another decision. He intended to return to the Radcliffe family. Something told him that another conversation with the members of the family was necessary. There were still details that had to be clarified. The two men parted ways. Mercer went to his office to begin the examination of the cups, while Giovanni returned to the Radcliffe mansion. When he arrived, he greeted Sir William once again. The owner of the house informed him that his wife Anna was not at home at the moment. However, the other members of the family were present. While listening to him, Giovanni caught himself thinking that speaking with Sir William no longer interested him very much. One question alone remained in his mind: why the owner of the house had reacted so calmly to the disappearance of such a valuable family jewel. Giovanni decided to ask directly. Tell me, Sir William, was the jewel insured? Sir William paused for a moment before answering. My father never wished even to imagine such a possibility. He said slowly, the family simply did not expect that something like this could ever happen. He sighed quietly. The jewel was not fully insured. Some members of the family suggested that we should insure, but my father refused it. He spent hours looking at the stone. Sometimes it seemed that he gave more attention to it than to the rest of the family. Sir William looked down briefly. Perhaps that's why I seem calm about its disappearance, but regardless of personal feelings, the law is the law. I would like the jewel that belonged to my father and to our entire family to be returned. Hearing this explanation, Giovanni understood a little better why Sir William behaved so calmly and why his reaction appeared almost indifferent. After this, Giovanni decided that it would be useful to speak with the other members of the family, Edward, Thomas, and Henry. Edward and Henry were Sir William's brothers. They did not show emotional concern about the disappearance of the jewel, but they frequently discussed its value. Several servants in the house had previously noticed that Edward and Henry often talked about the opportunities that could appear if the stone were sold. In the conversations, they sometimes even mentioned the possibility of starting a new industry in Ashford. Giovanni listened carefully to this information and thought that such discussions could hardly be accidental. He decided to find the brothers. At the moment, the butler was busy with other tasks, so the detective began to look through the rooms of the mansion on his own. Entering one of the rooms, Giovanni paused for a moment. He looked around the interior, then knocked lightly, announcing his presence. "Mr. Edward, Mr. Henry." At that moment another man entered the room. It was Thomas, their cousin. "This is Myron," Thomas said calmly. "May I ask what you are doing here?" Giovanni introduced himself politely. "My name's Giovanni Guida. I'm a detective. I would like to ask a few questions about missing jewel." Thomas did not appear interested in such conversation. "The family has already contacted the police," he replied. "I believe that the robber will eventually understand what he has done and return the jewel." He looked toward the door. "I'm afraid I have urgent matters to attend to." Giovanni did not insist. "Of course," he said calmly. "Please do not let me delay you." Before leaving, he glanced around the room once more. The room of the Mr. Thomas was quite large and well furnished. After thanking him politely, Giovanni left. Later he found Edward and Henry in the courtyard. Two men were sitting outside, slowly drinking their beverages and enjoying the fresh air. Giovanni approached them and joined the conversation. Soon the discussion turned naturally to the missing jewel. Both brothers admitted that in the past they had indeed considered the possibility of selling the stone. However, their father had always refused. In his opinion, the family business was already doing well enough. Edward explained that he did not want to change anything. Henry nodded in agreement. "Still, we always believed that greater opportunities existed, but our father's decision was always our priority." Giovanni then asked about insurance. The brothers confirmed that the idea had been discussed before, but their father had always rejected. He was convinced that no one would ever dare to steal the family relic. They also explained that family business belonged to all of them. After their father's death, the control of the company had been divided through the shares. "Thomas also owns a share," Henry added. "He participates in the business as well." These words made Giovanni slightly more attentive. He remembered that Sir William had mentioned earlier that discussions about insurance had taken place within the family. Brothers confirmed this again that added another detail. Thomas often complained that his share in the business was too small. Edward said he once said that disappearance of the jewel could create instability in the entire family inheritance. Giovanni thanked them politely for the conversation. After leaving the mansion, he went directly to Jack Mercer's office. Mercer had recently moved to Ashford and lived not far from Giovanni. His home was arranged in a somewhat unusual way. The first floor served as his office, while the second floor was where his family lived, his wife and their 2 children. Giovanni always believed they lived there quite comfortably, and he was always ready to help Mercer if necessary, especially in financial matters, which were never difficult for him. When Giovanni arrived, he knocked on the door. Mercer opened it almost immediately. He looked as if he had been preparing either to visit Giovanni or to call him. At that moment, Giovanni himself was deep in thought. All the details he had gathered during the day were slowly forming the troubling picture in his mind. Part 5. Soon Jack Mercer informed Giovanni about the results of the examination he had conducted. At the bottom of the cup, along with the sugar traces of substance called chlorosemnol had been discovered. This substance was rarely used in modern medicine, but it was still known for its ability to put a person to sleep, especially in situations involving pain or strong nervous tension. In general, its effect was simple. It quickly suppressed wakefulness and caused deep sleep. When Giovanni heard this, he only nodded quietly. The result confirmed the suspicion that had already formed in his mind. So the guards were not careless, he said calmly. They were put to sleep. Mercer agreed. It appears so. Giovanni remained silent for a moment, thinking carefully. I believe the arrested robber was telling the truth, he finally said. Now the evidence supports that. Without wasting time, he stood up. We should return to the Radcliffe house immediately. Mercer did not ask additional questions. He simply took his coat, and the 2 men left together. When they arrived at the Radcliffe mansion, again Giovanni asked Sir William to gather all the members of the family in the living room. After a short time, almost everyone was present. Thomas had already returned as well. The only person missing was Anna, Sir William's wife. Giovanni noticed her absence, but did not mention it yet. He stood calmly in the middle of the room and began speaking. I would like to begin by expressing my regret for the loss of the jewel that was so important to your father and to your family. The members of the family listened carefully. The criminal has been found, Giovanni continued. Several people immediately assumed that he was speaking about the man who had been arrested by the police. However, Giovanni raised his hand slightly. The situation is more complicated than it first appeared. He placed several objects on the table. They were the lockpicks and He placed several objects on the table. They were the lockpicks that had been taken from the arrested robber. A man who plans a robbery usually carries tools like this, Giovanni explained it. They are designed for opening doors and the windows. He paused for a moment. However, when I examined the crime scene, I noticed something unusual. The family members looked at him with a growing attention. The scratches on the window frame were not made by lockpicks, Giovanni continued. They were made by something sharp, most likely a knife. For a moment the room became completely silent. Giovanni spoke calmly. When people became wealthy, they often stopped paying attention to small details. Because of that, no one noticed that knife had disappeared from the kitchen. He folded his hands behind his back, but I noticed it. The detective continued explaining his reasoning. Those scratches on the window were made by that missing knife. Yet the robber we arrested had nothing sharp with him. He intended to use lockpick, but when he entered the house he discovered that the signs of the forced entry already existed. Giovanni slowly walked around the room while speaking. Everything looked as if the robbery had already taken place. He stopped and looked directly at the members of the family. The robber did not even examine the house properly. When he saw the jewel was not where it was supposed to be, he panicked and fled the mansion. Several people exchanged uncertain glances. Giovanni continued. According to the robber's statement, the reflection of Neptune should have been exactly where he was told it would be. He paused again. This leads to an important question. Giovanni looked slowly at each person in the room. How could an outsider know the structure of the house so precisely? And more importantly, how could he know that entering through that particular window on the second floor would be the easiest way? The tension in the room grew stronger. Giovanni then spoke again. I must also remove suspicion from the guards. They were not careless. They were deliberately put to sleep. He gestured slightly toward Mercer. The evidence for this was found in their cups. Mercer nodded silently. Giovanni continued. After speaking with each member of the family, I began to notice many details that had previously gone unnoticed. At that moment Thomas spoke for the first time. Are you suggesting that criminal is someone in this room? His voice sounded tense. Giovanni looked carefully at him. If I suspected Anna, Sir William's wife, he said calmly, I would not have gathered the family without her presence. He paused briefly. But she is not the person I need. Giovanni then remembered something important. When I was searching for Edward and Henry earlier today, I accidentally entered the wrong room. He looked directly at Thomas. It was your room, Mr. Thomas. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. Giovanni continued speaking with a calm precision. While using chlorosemnol and placing it in the guard's drinks, you stained your clothes. He paused again. You left those clothes in your room on the chair without paying attention to such small detail. The members of the family stared at Thomas with a growing confusion. Giovanni continued. And then there is the knife. He spoke slowly. The knives in the kitchen belong to a special collection called the 12 Months. They were made by special order. He looked directly at Thomas again. But the knife representing January is missing. Giovanni raised his hand slightly, and that is the knife that created the marks on the window frame. The room remained silent. The room remained silent. I believe you know exactly where that knife is, Giovanni said quietly. Thomas looked visibly nervous and irritated. The other members of the family looked at him with disbelief. They clearly did not understand how such a thing could have happened. Thomas tried to protest. This is absurd, but Giovanni calmly continued speaking. It was not easy to suspect a member of the family, he admitted. However, your share in the family business is quite small, and you wish it to gain more. Giovanni walked slowly across the room, using a small criminal from the bar as a distraction was a clever plan. The man with the fake mustache gave him the information he needed. Giovanni added one final observation. The knife was almost likely in your bag earlier when you left the room. A part of the blade was slightly visible. You'll probably notice it later and try to dispose of it. At that moment, Thomas understood that everything was finished. Part 6. At that moment, Thomas finally understood that everything was over. For several seconds he remained silent. The tension in the room became heavy, almost unbearable. The members of the Radcliffe family looked at him with confusion and disbelief, trying to understand how such a thing could have happened. Then Tom slowly lowered his head. "Yes," he said quietly. The single word seemed to echo through the room. "My father created this entire industry. He built the family business from nothing." His voice was filled with a bitterness. "And yet, as the son of his elder brother, I received almost nothing. Only a small part of everything he created." Sir William stepped forward immediately. "Thomas, we are family," he said firmly, but Thomas shook his head. "Family?" he repeated bitterly. "In reality it never worked that way. One man receives almost everything while another receives only a fraction." He looked around the room. "I only wanted what I believed should have been mine." Giovanni stood there quietly and observed the scene. There was no anger in his expression, only calm understanding. Finally he spoke. "Mr. Thomas Radcliffe, I am afraid you will have to be detained." At that very moment the door opened. Captain Cross entered the room. "I was told that I was needed here," he said. Giovanni nodded slightly. "Yes, Captain. Mr. Thomas Radcliffe is responsible for the theft of the jewel known as a reflection of Neptune. He should be arrested." The captain looked at Thomas for a moment, then turned to the officers who had entered behind him. "Take him." The officers stepped forward and escorted Thomas from the room. Sir William stood motionless. The shock in his face was obvious. For a long moment he seemed unable to speak. Finally he said quietly, "I will contact you later regarding your services, Mr. Guida." Giovanni gently raised his hand. "There is no need to hurry," he replied calmly. "Your family has more important matters to deal with now." Sir William nodded slowly. He lowered his head, clearly unsure of what to say or how to react. Thomas Radcliffe was led away by the police. His arrest brought an end to the entire investigation, but it left behind a heavy feeling, the feeling of the family that had lost not only a jewel but also trust. When everything was finally finished, Giovanni and Jack Mercer left the mansion together and walked slowly toward their car. For some time they remained silent. Then Mercer spoke. "It is strange, isn't it?" he said thoughtfully. "People believe that wealth brings peace and satisfaction." Giovanni looked back at the Radcliffe mansion. The large building now seemed cold and empty. despite its grandeur. Yes, Giovanni replied quietly, but very often the opposite happens. They continued walking slowly. As the wealth grows, Giovanni said, so does the desire for even more, and sometimes that desire becomes stronger than reason. He looked once more at the mansion. Once I believed that people who have everything must live happily, but reality proves something different. Mercer listened quietly. Even a man who possesses a great fortune can still feel underestimated. Giovanni continued. He can feel deprived, as if life itself has treated him unfairly. For a moment Giovanni smiled with a trace of irony, a strange paradox of human nature. They finally reached the car. Giovanni silently thanked Mercer for his help. He clearly understood that without Mercer's participation, the investigation might have ended very differently. For the first time that day Giovanni allowed himself to think about something else, about the future. Perhaps it was time for a small change. He suddenly realized that he had not attended a football match in almost 3 years. "Perhaps," he said lightly, "it's time to visit the stadium again and see how my favorite club is doing." Mercer laughed quietly. "I suspect the investigation will survive without you for one afternoon." They entered the car. Soon the vehicle began to move, carrying them away from the mansion, and from the story that had revealed far more about human nature than about crime itself. And somewhere far away in a quiet corner of Ashford, the city continued its life just as it always had. Well, that's it. Thank you for your attention, first of all, and I want to just share the short story about me. What I was called, just to do a favor, it was kind of just challenge for me because speaking is speaking. As in daily life, we just speak to each other. That's okay. But I guess I have somehow kind of this disorder with the reading. The breathing is difficult, and I don't know, maybe kind of pressure on me or somehow. But the story, the plot of the story, makes me interested in it, and it's just part of AB's just work. And well, what I think about this story, sometimes just we don't see what we have in our hands. So Thomas was that kind of person. He had everything. He lived in a well-being, but still he wanted more. So I don't know how to say, but we should appreciate what we have. If we can't, so it means just we will not just get anything from this life. Uh, I don't mean that sometimes we have less, but if we can get more in the right way, and if I just say in the way of the law legally, then yes, of course, we have to just move forward and work on it and get it. But when everything is just has finished it and everything just has established it and you have the wealth, I think wealth is enough. Some people will have wealth and they want more wealth. I don't know if that is legal and also in the right way. Yes, of course, I believe them. They can reach, they can achieve, and they will do. And I wish you to achieve your goal in the right way and appreciate what you have in your life. And thank you for your just attention. Thank you for your time. Uh,
This challenge is making me better. I hope and I believe so. Next time we will see each other. Thank you so much.